You know, you see it everywhere these days. This feeling, this promise of a cleaner, quieter world. It's a future that's all about green energy, and honestly, the whole transition feels like it's really picking up steam. But right at the very heart of this huge revolution, there's one single piece of technology that makes it all possible. And I mean, the electric vehicle, right? It's become the poster child for this green future. A sleek, quiet machine that runs on batteries instead of fossil fuels. It seems so simple, clean, and efficient. But is it really? Because behind that silent hum, there's this huge, messy global story. It's a story packed with intense competition, serious environmental questions, and massive geopolitical power plays. And that story starts deep, deep inside the Earth. So to really get what's going on with these batteries, we've got to go right back to the beginning, to source. We need to talk about their most critical ingredient, lithium. Some people even call it white gold. And our journey is going to take us to this remote, high-altitude stretch of salt flats in South America. So this is the Lithium Triangle. I mean, the amount of the world's lithium locked away here is just staggering. But check out how they get it out. Companies pump up insane amounts of salty water, brine, into these enormous ponds. And then they just let the desert sun bake away the water. And this is where the story gets really complicated, because this whole process uses a colossal amount of water in one of the driest places on the entire planet. It creates this direct conflict between the world's hunger for green energy and the very survival of the local ecosystems and communities who live there. And what's just wild is that the three countries sharing this massive resource, they're all playing the game completely differently. You've got Argentina, which has basically thrown the doors open to foreign money, letting its provinces call the shots. Then there's Chile, which is a bit more state-controlled, kind of partnering up with private companies. And then you have Bolivia, which has gone full-on nationalist. The government wants to control everything from the mine all the way to the finished battery. It's a move that's protected their resources, for sure, but it has also slowed down production to a crawl. But look, this isn't just a story about South America. This quote from Fry Maguwu in Zimbabwe, it just perfectly captures this cruel, twisted logic at the heart of the whole energy transition. You have countries that have contributed almost nothing to climate change, and yet they're getting hit the hardest by its effects. And now they're also being asked to bear the environmental and social costs of digging up the materials for the rest of the world's green solutions. They're paying twice. And the money, my gosh, the economic cost is just unbelievable. This number right here, $12 billion. That's how much Zimbabwe is estimated to have lost between 1980 and 2012. Just from illegal trade and money disappearing from its resource industries. It's a huge reminder that just having valuable stuff in the ground doesn't mean your country is going to get rich from it. Okay, so that leads us perfectly into the next part of the journey. We're moving from the mine to the factory. Because the real power in the global battery game isn't just about who can dig minerals out of the ground. It's all about what happens next. And here's the thing. This is the real secret sauce to understanding the battery wars. China figured out a long time ago that you don't need to own all the mines. True dominance comes from controlling the middle of the supply chain. All those complex, high-tech steps of refining, processing, and manufacturing that turn raw dirt into actual working battery parts. And this slide, wow, it just lays it all out. Just look at these numbers. For 2024, China is producing over 90% of the world's anodes. That's the negative part of the battery. 85% of cathode materials, that's the positive part, and 80% of the final battery cells. It's an absolute masterclass in creating a choke point in a global supply chain, and it's something that is incredibly hard for any other country to even think about competing with right now. So how on earth did they do it? Well, it wasn't an accident. It was a really smart long-term strategy with four main parts. First, they used consistent government policies and huge subsidies to create a stable, predictable market. Second, they tied that industrial policy to a big push for patents and setting national standards. Third, as we just saw, they were relentless about controlling that middle part of the supply chain. And fourth, and this might be the most brilliant part, they focused on scale over perfection. Instead of waiting for the absolute perfect battery, they pushed good enough technology into mass production. By getting cheaper batteries into millions of cars first, they just completely captured the market, built these gigantic factories, and learned how to do it better and cheaper than anyone else. It's a head start that is now incredibly difficult for competitors to overcome. So as you can imagine, the rest of the world looked at that situation and started to get pretty nervous. That kind of dependency has kicked off a global race to catch up, and it's a race being fought on two different fronts. One is about inventing new battery technologies, and the other is about building new geopolitical alliances.
A modern battery is like a really complex cake recipe. It's not just about lithium. You've got cobalt, which is often tied to some really awful and unethical mining practices. You've got nickel, which has its own environmental issues. And you've got graphite, where the supply chain is, you guessed it, also heavily concentrated. Each one of these ingredients has its own complicated and often pretty troubling journey to get into your battery. And that is exactly why the hunt for new battery chemistries is so incredibly urgent.
And the most promising challenger on the scene right now? It's the sodium-ion battery. Now, what's so interesting here is the trade-off. Sodium-ion batteries are less energy dense, so you won't get as much range in a car. But, and this is a huge but, look at the upsides. They're made from stuff that's super abundant and cheap, like salt. They're safer with less fire risk, and their supply chain is way less concentrated in one part of the world. This technology could be a total game changer, not just for the tech itself, but for the entire geopolitical landscape. And on the geopolitical chessboard, the pieces are moving fast. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, is a massive move. It basically offers you a tax credit for buying an EV, but only if the battery's minerals and parts come from the U.S. or its close trading partners. And now the EU is scrambling to make sure it's considered one of those trusted partners. For both of them, the goal is crystal clear: build new, secure supply chains with friends and allies and get out from under that single point of dependency. And all of this, it all circles back to where we began. It comes back to those resource-rich nations that are at the very heart of this entire story. Right now, they are facing a really profound choice, a fork in the road between two completely different futures. It's a choice between atrophy or ascent. Okay, let's just break this down. On one side, you have the atrophy scenario. And yeah, that's the classic resource curse story we've seen so many times before. Countries compete against each other in a race to the bottom, just exporting raw materials while staying totally dependent on foreign tech. It leads to environmental ruin and social division. But then there's the other path, the ascend scenario, this idea of a lithium commonwealth. This is something totally different. This is where those nations team up, become a unified bloc, develop their own sustainable technology, build a real regional manufacturing industry, and negotiate with the world from a position of incredible strength. So really, it all boils down to this one question. Will these countries just be a passive source of stuff for the world's energy transition, or will they become the active architects of their own sustainable future? Look, the clean energy transition, it's happening. It's not an if anymore, it's a how. The technology is here, but the choices we make about where it comes from and who benefits, those choices are going to define the next 100 years. So the real question we have to ask ourselves is, are we going to power our clean future by just repeating the same old extractive mistakes of the past? Or can we actually use this incredible moment to build a global system that's not just sustainable, but also fair?